Back in our last devlog, we introduced Project Crucible, a survival horror game that borrows from both the roguelike and immersive sim genres. We talked about our inspirations and what kind of game we are looking to create. For those who haven't seen our first devlog, Project Crucible is a survival horror game set in the trenches of a fictional world war. The gameplay loop consists of resource management and blowing up obstacles in order to advance further into the trench, all the while maintaining your diminishing oxygen supply.
While making your way through the trench, you must choose to confront or avoid soldiers who seem to have been afflicted with an unknown illness. You are tasked with clearing your way into the bunker and finding your colonel in order to receive your orders. More of the story and lore will be discovered as you progress through the game and interact with objects and characters.
Hi, I'm Ergo,
And I'm Stimpack,
and we're happy to bring you the second devlog for Project Crucible.
At the end of our last devlog, we talk about a mechanic that will be blocking your progress throughout the game. That is the obstacle system. During the constant shelling of the war, many rows of the trench became blocked by debris, which required dynamite in order to clear a path. We achieved this by creating a simple mound mesh with separate concrete meshes, fractured it in Blender, and imported it. We then added an add explosion force once it spawned in to send the debris flying. This allowed for the explosions to look more impactful with the debris scattering around the explosions. The dynamite spawns tie into a random item spawner system, in which the script sifts through a list of items and chooses which to spawn. On top of that, there's a percentage in which serves a likelihood of this item spawning. While it can be used against enemies, we leave it up to the player to decide where it's best spent. We want each run through the trench to be a teacher, but it is never something you can fully rely on.
Since the game is taking place in a trench, we really wanted to make sure the environment has a lot of visual variety and cool things to look at. While the repetitive look of the trench rows is intentional, we also took care to create more distinct set pieces that will help the player orient better. We are currently working on an interior section of the trench that will be a stark contrast to the outdoor environment in terms of lighting and atmosphere. It's important to have points of interest in the level, and we are looking to add more in the future.
In the previous devlog, we mentioned that we were lacking a healing system, so we went ahead and added one. Some of you may notice that the model we went with is the AI-2 medical kit used by Soviet troops. Although it wasn't introduced into the Cold War, since we are operating in a fictional world, we went ahead with the model. Let us know in the comments if you would like to see this model change to something more appropriate for the time.
One of our biggest goals with the game is immersion and the lack of heads-up displays in UI. When we introduced the gas mask mechanic, which is integral to the gameplay, we talked about how we had a timer display on screen, and that didn't sit right with us. We want the player to never be fully prepared, and that constant fear of not knowing how much oxygen they have left is crucial in building up the tension and atmosphere. That being said, we created a pocket watch that will be obtainable through exploration that will clue the player in on how much oxygen remains in their current filter.
We didn't want it to be a heads-up display, so we created an animation of the player physically pulling out the watch and checking the time. Initially, the clock handles didn't move, and the time displayed in numbers on the screen, but we made the clock handles move separately. This was achieved by creating the face of the watch as a separate texture and the handles on a separate sprite sheet, which was then tied to the gas mask timer. We kept a close eye on the comments and feedback we were getting. A lot of the comments were very constructive and provided really interesting ideas for us to try out and implement. There were no indicator for oxygen running out and the player would die suddenly. So, Death Gaming proposed that the gas mask should start to gradually fog up and running low on oxygen.
We liked this idea, so we went ahead and implemented it, so once there is a certain amount of oxygen remaining, the player's view will start to fog up and blur, signifying to the player that it is time to start looking for another filter. Another question we've received was from CRTYT, who asked why the player character doesn't simply up and leave the trench. So we created a more than good reason why that's not a good idea.
We received a lot of feedback on both the devlog and our Reddit post on weapon feedback animations, specifically the shotgun. So we added a screen shake as well as blood splatter effect on the gas mask visor to portray the raw impact of the weapon. While we're satisfied with the current results, there are always room for improvement.
Previously, in order to pick up an item, the player would have to hold a key, and we just felt this was breaking up the pace. To avoid this, we created a hand cursor that would pop up when picking up an item, and made it so that you can pick up an item with the press of the button.
Also introduced physics to the game, so the player can pick up certain objects and move them around. We plan on expanding on the physics aspects of items the player will be able to find and how they will interact with the environment, like a glass bottle shattering when thrown.
While we have the core gameplay loop set up, we are currently discussing the potential of an inventory system. One of the core aspects of the survival horror genre is inventory and resource management. In the current state of the game, the player is able to pick up unlimited resources such as ammo and dynamite. We are hoping to implement a standard survival horror inventory that will allow you to carry a limited amount of items that is expendable through obtaining pouches found in the world. What we have currently works, but we feel like the lack of resource management takes away the tension and decision making that are the staples of the survival horror genre.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this devlog. We hope you enjoyed the changes we're making to the game. In order to stay up to date with the game's development, subscribe to our channel and make sure to have your notifications turned on so you don't miss out on our future videos.
We hope to see you in the next devlog.